Hello, everybody, and welcome to CodeCast by STL Tech Talk, where we will bring you the most relevant information for those of you who are living every day in the world of coding. Today, I am flying solo. It's just me, Alejandro Ramirez, your host, and I have big shoes to fill for JJ and Gus Emery, who are just awesome hosts and very, very technologically savvy people. This show could not be possible without our grateful sponsors. We're thankful to have them. But we have Inertia Software. That's ENERTIA-software.com, and also TechSystems.com. That is TEKSYSTEMS. TechSystems and Inertia Software. Thank you guys for making this show possible. Today's show is going to be a little bit of a change to what you're probably accustomed to. Two big reasons. So first one, I hope this is a show that you can enjoy in your car without having to pop the video. We're not going to show anything. We're actually just going to, well, I keep saying we. I am just going to talk to you about a very important topic. And therefore, you should be able to play this either before you sleep or when you are driving in your commute without, getting at risk of not paying attention. So what topic am I going to talk about today? This is a topic that everybody goes through every now and then. Potentially, you could be going through it for the first time. And this is selecting a programming language. Whatever is the situation that you're in, perhaps you're just getting out of college and you took some classes and you cover certain languages, but now you're getting ready to go to work and you're deciding, do I really want to keep using that language? Should I choose a different one? Should I learn multiple languages? Perhaps you're already in the workforce and you have been using the same language or languages for a while and are trying to decide if you want to make a switch to work in a different field, either it's mobile and wearables. I want to do some other stuff. I want to do video games. What languages can I use? Or can I use my current language for other things? So, like JJ says, whatever the case may be, I am going to talk about the journey of selecting a language, and I'm going to tell you why I personally pick C# as my language of preference. So, just to give you some background, my job today, I am a software consultant. I've been working in software for 17 years. And through those years, I started with a language like everybody who went to college for computer science did. And I started with Pascal and Visual Basic and FoxPro and things like that. And when I graduated, the web was there. And so I was like immediately needing to learn something new because the languages that I was using at the time were not equipped to work on the web. So I had to teach myself HTML and then learn some Java. And then that journey took me to kind of want to get back into Visual Basic, but we have Visual Basic.NET and C#. So after I learned Java, it was easier for me to get into C#. But again, if you take a moment to think about your current situation, where are you today? Well, is it that you're trying to make a change? You're trying to get the most out of the language that you're already using if you don't want to change. But in this case, I'm going to ask you to be a little bit flexible. I think languages have changed quite a bit. I think we have very many new or newer languages if you've been using something from a while ago. And these new languages or these modernized languages are offering a lot of new opportunities for developers because I think it is true or it is accurate to say that, don't hate me for this, but you almost don't need a computer science degree to code. They've made, or programming languages have evolved to a point that it is a lot easier to learn to code. Now, with that said, that for us as programmers, those of you or us who are already doing some programming at any levels, it makes it easier to pick other languages. If you come from a different school of thought, if you were coding before object-oriented programming, that was a big leap to get into object-oriented programming. And then from object-oriented programming, there has been some other patterns and practices that have developed that, people have adopted them and some haven't. But so back to the basics. So again, your situation, I'm unaware of your situation, but let's pretend that for some reason you need to make a decision today. You need to pick a new language, a new programming language. And so the first thing to ask is, should I pick one language or should I learn multiple languages? Because right now there are many platforms, if you will, to choose from to target as a developer. By platforms, I mean there's the desktop, and that is basically applications that run locally in a computer. You also have the mobile platforms, and by that I mean laptops and netbooks and Surface Pros and those tablets that are kind of a hybrid of laptop and tablet. And then you have your second layer of mobile devices like tablets and cell phones and now wearables, and then of course the Internet of Things. So there's quite a bit of choices, and really the biggest thing is this going to run locally on a machine? That's what I consider kind of a desktop. Let's just call it desktop applications for simplicity. Or does it need to be web-based? Is it going to run through a browser? Whether it's on a mobile device or any device, does it need to be running on a browser? Or is it a native application that needs to run on a mobile device? Or maybe a specialty application that needs to run on some wearable like Apple Watch or the Pebble Watch or whatnot, or some other more specialized hardware. So, well, if you only had to target a very specialized platform, some of the choices that come, for example, if you think I need to create websites, well, so obviously HTML and JavaScript and Cascade style sheets, CSS, that seems to be like the obvious solution. Okay, all right. Now I want to do web applications too. Well, for web applications, the choices get a little bit more complicated. So you have ASP.NET, you have JSP, you have Ruby and Python and J2EE and Perl and PHP and all of those things that will enable a website to be more of a dynamic web application that actually produces content dynamically and or uses databases and stuff like that. So that's getting still a little bit complicated. Here in St. Louis, I can tell you can still see kind of a big divide of half of the, I don't want to say population, but half of the workforce is kind of like Java, the other half is .NET. So just for simplicity, let's say again, okay, so for web apps and web application development, .NET or Java, okay. For mobile app development, well, so I guess if we go by who's making the most money in the United States, it will be iOS first, then Android, and then the Windows phone apps. If you're targeting different markets, your combinations might be different. If you're in Brazil, then that's iOS, Windows Phone, and then Android. And it could vary by country. So, but still, we're targeting like very specialized solutions. Now, if you want to do web-based applications for mobile, well, you kind of back to the same thing. So does Java work for a mobile phone, or does .NET work for a mobile phone, or do I have to go with like WebKit, which is JavaScript libraries that only work with the iOS platform or the Android platform? So there's some research you have to do. Now, if you want to get into video games, that is also opening a whole bunch of other opportunities. This is where we could think about things like C++, and C++ can be used for anything, but you're really getting into more complicated, more complex rather, not complicated, more complex production of software where you have full control of what you're building. So C++ is great for that. Learning curve is probably a little bit more tedious than other newer languages, but there you have it. Now, Internet of Things. So that is mostly devices, hardware that can be programmed, and for that you're going to get into a variety of different languages, and sometimes it might be proprietary code, or you could choose from a different set of programming languages. But I want to say again, probably C++ will be an obvious choice for many of you. Now for wearables, well, if it's an Android wearable, you kind of have to go with the Android wearables. If it's an iOS wearable like the Apple Watch, then you have to go with the iOS side of things. But so if you, again, after we visited all of these options, if you just have to target a specific context, well, then those options that we talked about could potentially be the very first thing that comes to mind, or that people that you're going to be working with are going to tell you that, well, that's what needs to be used. Okay, but what if you have to work across the board on a regular basis, or just have the freedom to say, well, today I'm in the mood to write a video game, and I'm a C++ developer, or I am a JavaScript developer, or what options do I have? So you kind of need to think about that when you're picking a language. So if I choose this today, what am I going to be able to do tomorrow, and then years to come? What options do I have today? Because I may not just want to do that solution today for one specific platform. So it's just something very important to think about. There is no harm if you just want to specialize in something and spend several years doing that. There is always risks that perhaps a technology may become obsolete, if you will. So maybe not the best example, but think about Objective-C. Apple is now pushing Swift. And the jump from Objective-C to Swift is not that swift, if you allow me the pun. It is quite different. It's probably looking more like C, but Objective-C by itself had a pretty steep learning curve already. And Swift can be a lot easier if you've never done anything before in iOS. That's kind of the purpose of why they brought it in. But for all of the school of people that were already doing that, they were like, "Ooh, that's going to be a little bit maybe difficult." So, and that's going to happen invariably, whatever languages you choose. But if you were just doing Objective-C, you were obviously just targeted for iOS applications. But what if you were kind of one of those people that wanted to do more things, or have maybe you're doing side work, or you're a consultant firm that have clients that ask you for different things. So why not have a little bit of options? And so honestly, try to keep your options open as much as you can. So I will challenge you to not settle for one, and try to pick a solution that will be the most flexible and that can allow you to reuse as much as your code as possible, or your coding skills. Like I was telling you earlier, in my personal journey, I kind of jump around as things were maturing towards the web, and I went from Visual Basic to Java and then to C#. The reason I went to C# is because C# was in many ways very similar to Java. I think it came to compete with Java, and to attract a lot of the Java developers, it was really, really made similar. And so to me, it was a lot easier to pick C# because of the way it was written than to try to go back to the way Visual Basic code is written. So another consideration, which is very fair, is to look at your background. If you just came out of college and you were using a certain language, and it's a lot faster for you to just hash out things in one language, well, just stick with that and get the most out of it. If you're just kind of starting from scratch, then you're just going to have to try out a couple of things, see what's easy to you. So how will you go about choosing? Well, languages have different learning curves. So if you have like zero notion of object-oriented programming, I think it's fair game. You can pick whatever you want. If you have object-oriented, if you have no oriented programming experience, honestly, this is like open playground. Now, if you have done stuff in non-object-oriented programming, and you're trying to get into object-oriented programming, honestly, before you start picking a new language, you're going to have to take a class in object-oriented programming, just to kind of make or help your brain think in those terms. Because C#, which is kind of the main topic of what I'm going to take you next, C# is an object-oriented programming language. And most of the languages that you're going to use today are probably going to be in that capacity. I have to bring up today the debate of what about HTML and JavaScript? They seem to be kind of the ubiquitous choice nowadays, that I can do everything in HTML and JavaScript. I want to say that a lot of people are choosing them. I spent several years as a software tester, and I can tell you that my biggest issues with HTML and JavaScript is that, or are that, there's a lot of cross-browser compatibility issues that have not been ironed out between the makers of the Explorer or the browsers, excuse me, like Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Opera, etc. So you will still have to spend quite a bit of time testing all of those different combinations. Like, oh, does my app work if I'm on a Mac with this browser, or if I'm on a PC with this browser? And if you're in a mobile device and it has a browser, the browser's versions are not exactly the same as your laptop or desktop computer version. So to me, that's kind of one of the biggest problems, because then you end up working a lot of code that says, oh, if it's this browser, then do this. If it's this browser, then do this. If it's this browser, then do this. That to me, when somebody solves that problem, then you have a friend in me. But I actually learned HTML and JavaScript years ago, but I decided to go a different path. I don't say it's necessarily a bad thing. If you're just starting, it could be a viable thing. Just be aware that there's some challenges in that regard. Now, JavaScript is not a programming language; it's a scripting language. And the way to think about it is you don't compile JavaScript. So JavaScript is basically read by the browser and interpreted at runtime, as opposed to a compile code object or compile of finish object that you basically run it through the compiler. It produces an executable, and all of your logic is already there. So there's faster performance, arguably. Although JavaScript has really made a comeback because they made it a lot lighter weight and so forth. But if you wanted my personal opinion on, well, should I pick HTML and JavaScript? If that's what your background is, if you really know how to get around that very well, go for it. The other only thing I will probably like to complain about is that to make an application look and feel like the native environment where it's going to run, if you're using something, I hate to use the word generic, but if you're using something like HTML and JavaScript and CSS, you're probably going to have to make that look and feel yourself. You're going to have to fabricate that look and feel as much as you can. And in most cases, you can tell when an app was not built with the native code. And call me picky. It's not like, oh, this is not made with native code, I'm not going to download this app. I don't really think that's the issue. It's just a matter of aesthetics. So it will probably, again, take you a little bit more time to find the imagery or produce the imagery that will make it look more native, if you will. So, okay, pickles aside. I already told you how to choose. Look at your background, look at your context. How I chose, I already told you my story, and I hope you can decide on your own that, well, I think I'm going to feel good with my decision. Take a couple of classes, start learning the language, see how much of a learning curve it is, talk to people who have done it, and then they'll tell you whether you kind of need to step it back a little bit and take some classes or go from there. But so what I really wanted to get to is why I chose C# and why I think a lot of you should also choose C#. I'm not getting paid by anybody to say this. This is just kind of a solution that, or a preference that evolved over time. I have worked in companies that are primarily Java-based. I have worked with companies that have used .NET. I have worked for a Mac application development shop. And so you can call me platform agnostic, if you will. I have a Windows phone and an iPhone and an Android phone, and I just love each one of them as much as I hate them. There's things that I like and things I don't like, but I'm not kind of married to anyone. I mean, I'm wearing a Cortana shirt. So, and speaking of that, before I get to the next part of the topic, I'm gonna do a raffle for those of you who are watching live. I have this coveted ninja cat riding the fire breathing unicorn from Microsoft. This is a sticker that I just recently purchased, and I'm going to give this away to the first person who pings me on Twitter and tells me the answer to the following question. So, what was the other programming language that I mentioned that I used in college that wasn't Visual Basic? Actually, I said two, but if you get one of the two right, then you'll get a sticker. So ping me on Twitter, and I'll figure out how to give this to you, whether we meet for coffee or I ship it to you. But okay, it's there. So continuing where we were, oh, and by the way, my Twitter handle is here on my name tag, so it's at AlejandroRMZ. At the end of the show, I will try to go to the Twitter feed before this show finishes and see if anybody was watching live and gets this big boy or bad boy. Okay, so why did I choose C# and why should you choose C# too? So after I spent many years in software testing, and I decided to go back to development, and I picked C#, like I said, because of all of the Java exposure that I had. But that was kind of the first choice. But when it came to look at what tools do I have available to write code in C#, well, when I used Visual Basic before, I was very pleased with the Visual Basic environment. This is before Visual Studio. But what Visual Studio is basically what the standalone Visual Basic used to be. And I used to be fascinated by Visual Basic. The reason I picked to choose that, the reason I picked that language to be one of the languages I learned in college was because of the simplicity to build user interfaces, and then how I could just not worry about that and write the code, or worry about spending my time writing code and then being able to tweak the user interface with ease and being able to run the apps. And I think Visual Studio today has come a very long way, and by far I personally think it's the best integrated development environment, or IDE. I think that other IDEs have come a long way too. I have used my fair share, like NetBeans and Eclipse, Xcode, and some others, but I think a lot of them have been copying the Visual Studio experience, because you really have a one-stop shop to do all of your coding needs. You can develop, you can test, and you can deploy your apps. And that's huge. I mean, it sounds like a small deal, but let me elaborate a little bit. So how do you develop code in Visual Studio? So if you're doing web applications or you're doing desktop applications, first of all, Visual Studio comes with a whole bunch of templates. And I'm sure Eclipse and other tools come with templates. But this, of course, is targeted for the Microsoft platform to begin with. And so you have all these templates that out of the box just solve a lot of your problems. And you can tweak those to solve your own problems. So development-wise, you also have this wonderful library that has not only rich descriptions, it has a good community of users that can answer your questions. All the Microsoft MVPs answer your questions. And also a lot of examples, which is something I don't find in like the Apple development documentation. Whenever I try to solve a problem with iOS code that I'm writing, it takes me probably 2-3 times longer to figure out how to use a method call as opposed to going to the Visual Studio documentation. Plus, the cost of Visual Studio, if you're in an organization, you can probably afford it, no big deal. If you are an individual that has no money or are trying just to do solo freelance stuff, there was an Express edition that has become the community edition, and that's free. And for the most part, it's pretty much everything that you can do with the paid editions. So there's no more excuse to, oh, I don't have any money. Well, you can get that. If you're a startup company, you can get BizSpark, or if you're a student, you can get into DreamSpark and get free MSDN licenses and use all of that. But anyway, that's on the development side. On the test side, you can write your tests within Visual Studio. You can coordinate builds for your code and have them run unit tests or other automated tests that you want to use. One of my favorite pieces, if you're doing web apps, you have a built-in web server. So if you don't want to mess with IIS on your computer, Visual Studio comes with IIS Express, so you can test web apps right there. And let me clarify something. Web apps built with ASP.NET or with Visual Studio.NET, they don't only run in Windows machines because, well, as you probably know, web application or web site can run on any browser. With, of course, if you're doing your testing, you're going to find some issues and fix those issues. But so whether you pick Java or ASP.NET, in this case, I picked C# because I could write code in C# easily, and so anybody in any browser could use those web apps. Now, for desktop apps, of course, I was just looking to target people using Windows, so Visual Studio obviously lets you only do Windows. It doesn't let you run or create Mac OS applications or Linux applications that run on their desktops. But all of the benefits that I explained before. Now, that's kind of one of the layers. We talk about web apps, websites. Yes, you can also create static websites, and same deal, you can develop, you can test immediately by pushing a key and it fires up your web server locally. If you have a remote server, you can orchestrate the deployment to the web server and it takes care of all of that for you. And when you're ready to deploy and make changes, you just publish the changes and it does a lot of that fairly easily from one user interface. So, okay, we talked about that. What if I want to do some mobile stuff? So one of the things I got into 2 years ago was Windows Store development, Windows Store apps for Windows 8, and also Windows Phone 8 development. And I already knew how to use Visual Studio. I already knew C#. So all I needed to do was just figure out, well, what is the template? What does the template for Windows Phone or Windows Store apps looks like? Well, it turns out that it looks pretty similar to what you guys might be used to see in web applications built with ASP.NET in some ways. So it's not like HTML and ASP.NET. It's its own, C# code behind and XAML for the UI. But the learning curve was incredible. I kid you not. 2 years ago at Days of .NET, I gave a talk about building a Windows Store app in 45 days. And this is no joke. I mean, it was that fast. When I finished my Windows Store app, it took me a week to port that app to the Windows Phone because it pretty much reused all of the logic, so I didn't have to rewrite a whole lot. There were some things that the phone didn't do that the Windows Store app did, but as we are approaching Windows 10, not only we're going to be able to make that more transparent with universal apps, we're also going to be able to put those apps in the Xbox One, which I'm super excited about. And speaking of gaming, so if you know C#, I think Microsoft released something called Visual XNA at some point, which allowed you to create games for DirectX with C# among other things. I didn't really play with that because when they released that, I wasn't targeting that platform. But when it came to target applications used with or mobile applications used in other platforms, well, I was in Visual Studio now. I wanted to do iOS apps. So first I went the route of iOS and Xcode, and then at some point I discovered something called Xamarin, which is basically an IDE. Well, you have two modalities. You can run Xamarin as a plugin of Visual Studio, which brings its own templates to build iOS, Android apps, Windows Phone, and Windows Store apps. Also, Mac OS apps and Windows Forms apps. So all of a sudden, there is this new platform called Xamarin that is based on the Mono project, which is the open source implementation of .NET, or an implementation of the .NET platform by open source developers. This is the same people, or some of the same people that created the Mono project, Miguel de Casa, and this guy was also involved at some point with one of the Linux distributions. I think he was with Fedora or Symbian, excuse me. But anyway, so So these guys that have been putting a lot of hours all of a sudden came up with this project. So now if you are a paid subscriber of Visual Studio, you could buy this plugin into Visual Studio and start writing apps for these platforms. How does that work? The reason I was fascinated by this, um, they did not make you write Objective-C or Java inside Visual Studio. Rather, they wrapped all of the libraries from Android and iOS into C# libraries. So how crazy is that? I can write C# code to create iOS apps from Visual Studio. Yeah, I know. It sounded like impossible to believe. Also Android apps from Visual Studio. So there's still some room for improvements if you want to run or write iOS apps. There's still some dependencies due to licensing issues that you still have to run a Mac side by side as a build machine to kind of go get some components. It has to have Xcode installed, but you can work from Visual Studio and occasionally have to go to the Mac to do things. I personally prefer to use the standalone Xamarin Studio. It's cheaper for me at the moment. I don't have to pay for the corporate license, but for $25 a month to month, I can get a license of Xamarin Studio for iOS apps. And again, just with C# code, I can write an iOS app from beginning to end. And the best part is this app does not look like something that somebody put together that looks like an iOS app. This actually creates code that is native code. So your apps reuse all of the UI components from Xcode. They reuse all of those libraries. So your app is native when it's done. You're just kind of wrapping all of that workflow in a tool that is familiar to you and in a language, in a programming language that is familiar to you, the language being C#. You don't get the chance to work with other languages, I believe, but I could be wrong. I don't think you can do VB.NET, but maybe you can. But anyway, so Xamarin was to me a no-brainer, and I've been using it now for probably more than 6 months. You do require to have a bit of knowledge of the architectures that you're targeting, because there's some knowledge that needs to be transitioned. But again, kind of like following the Visual Studio example, the documentation of Xamarin is wonderful. It really makes the transition pretty easy. And so if you never done an iOS app, I think that their forums, their training, everything they have is just, it just really makes it a lot easier. The final frontier to me was games. So how do you target video games if you are a C# developer? So to me, the platform of choice that became an obvious choice was Unity. There are tons of Unity games out there. The game engine looks fantastic. They have a 3D engine and a 2D engine. If you saw our previous podcast, or CodeCast, excuse me, we, over the course of less than an hour, built a mini Flappy Bird clone. If you didn't catch that episode, now for that one, you do have to turn on your monitor and watch it on your computer. So if you watch that episode, during the episode, we run into some issues, but then we posted a follow-up video that is exclusively walking end-to-end through that tutorial on how to use Unity with C#. Now, Unity also supports JavaScript, but if you're already familiar with C# like I was at this point, then the first time I opened Unity to follow that tutorial that we shared last time, I was just like, holy cow. The biggest thing about Unity is that all of the physics and all of the manipulation of objects in space, a lot of the game logic is already built in, so you're literally just putting objects there, and through some C# code, you're manipulating those objects. Like when you push a certain key, you want the object to jump or to play a sound, and that's almost like scripting with C#. It's crazy easy. An interesting thing to know about Unity is that the code that it generates is actually based on Mono. So it's kind of like using Xamarin if you think about it. And I think that's a huge eye-opener of where C# is going. So no matter what level of developer you are, If you're a beginner, an advanced beginner, intermediate, or advanced, I think that C# is definitely a language that will open lots of doors for you. To give you some examples, and to recap what you can do with C# with everything we said, so you can do ASP.NET for web apps, you can do Windows desktop applications, you can write Windows Store apps for the Microsoft Surface and other tablets that are not made by Microsoft, like the HP tablets or the Dell Venues or the Toshiba Encores that you can see on TV. You can write Windows phone apps. You can write with Xamarin, you can target iOS apps. You can do Mac desktop apps. You can do Android apps, of course. If you choose to do so, you can instead do your Windows Store apps and Windows Phone apps with Xamarin. And just recently published, you can also use Xamarin to build Apple Watch apps. With Unity, this is something I didn't mention. Unity, as of version 5, they have a free tier, and it's free until you make your first $100,000. That's 100,000 US dollars. So for the little guys like you and me, well, I think we can get away with using Unity 5 for free until we make that amount of money. And notice the optimism, until we make it. I'm not saying if we make it. I'm saying when we make it, then we'll have to buy the license. But by the time you make that amount of money, you can buy 2 or 3 licenses. Anyway, so Unity lets you target consoles. So you can write games for Xbox, PlayStation. I'm not sure what the contractual obligations are about this. I don't think it's cheap to convince PlayStation and Xbox to let you publish games for them. I'm sure it's not necessarily something cheap, because you still have to create a disk, and I imagine that's probably not cheap. But if you're looking into get into the business of console gaming, well, Unity is one option. With the same base code, you can export that not only to consoles, you can export it to Windows and Mac. Yeah, you can create an executable game that runs on Windows and Mac. Well, Windows or Mac, not the same executable, of course. Also, you can target all of the mobile or the popular mobile platforms. The same code can be exported to run on iOS, Android, Windows, and also BlackBerry. So, hey, it's kind of another one-stop shop. So, picture this trio: Visual Studio, Xamarin, Unity. I honestly think that's my personal choice again, and I wanted to share that with you. I hope that the journey is somewhat enlightening for those of you who are trying to make a decision. I wrote a blog post about this. My blog is Alejandro, kind of want to see my name here, Alejandro. Obviously, if you're not looking at this, but it's Alejandro, Alejandro.codes, .codes, like coding, Alejandro.codes. And the URL for this article, well, it's right now on the home screen. It might not be there a long time as I continue blogging, but it's alejandro.codes/C-sharp. And the article is called Why I Pick C# and You Should Too. And this is the article is a shorter version of this, but I wanted to take the time to talk to you guys about this. Before we close this episode, which has been interesting as a monologue, and I'm surprised I have not had to drink any water. I still have my voice. I wanted to open this up to say, if you guys have any topics that you would like us to talk about, please let us know. We're going to go back to inviting some guests to talk us through the different topics in different levels of complexity. So we're going to invite people to talk to us about how to get started with ... We want to bring people that are kind of intermediate, middle of the road, and we also want to bring some people that talk about some more hardcore topics so that we cater to all of you. But we really want to understand who our audience is, what you guys want to hear about. Are these sessions helpful? Do you want more content for beginners? Do you want more content for intermediates? What do you want to hear about? And we'll love to get all that feedback. And again, in case you weren't paying attention, I'm giving away this or a sticker of the Ninja cat from Microsoft riding the fire-breathing unicorn all you have to do is just go to Twitter. Ping me on Twitter is at AlejandroRMZ, ALEJANDRORMZ, so kind of short for Ramirez. And just tell me which language did I mention that I learned when I was in college. That was not Visual Basic, because that's kind of the tricky part. You might have to rewind this and listen to it 2 or 3 times. But I think that's all I have now. I want to thank again Inertia Software and Tech Systems, our great sponsors, for making this CodeCast possible. Thank you guys for tuning in with us, whether live or after the recording goes to the different podcasting stations. Please stay in touch. Let us know what you guys need, and have a great night. Thank you. Take care.